President. I rise to speak in favour of the Residential Tenancies Miscellaneous Amendment Bill 2023, and I speak proudly in favour of this legislation. This is transformative legislation. It's something that is going to help South Australians that are struggling in the middle of the worst rental crisis we have seen in generations, the worst housing crisis we have seen in generations. And look, if the Greens' fingerprints are all over it, I'm proud of that, Mr Acting President, because this bill actually achieves many of the things that we in the Greens have been campaigning on for many, many years. And of course it doesn't go as far as we would like. We would have liked to have seen action on rent prices in terms of rent capping. That's an issue that I've campaigned on over many years. However, this bill makes some really important changes that are going to change the lives of many South Australians for the better. And I'm going to talk to some of those features of the bill in a moment. Before doing so, I do want to put on the public record my thanks to Minister Andrea Michaels for the collegiate way in which she has worked with the Greens in approaching this. And in particular, I want to acknowledge her leadership and that of the government in taking on this important reform piece, because it has been long overdue. So I do want to thank her for that. I also want to acknowledge the work of her advisor, Chad Buchanan, with whom we have worked closely, and my own advisor, Melanie Selwood, who's also played a key role in negotiations with the government, and Commissioner Denis Sulio, who worked on the government's review process. So I really want to acknowledge their work and, of course, the work of the community sector, all of the groups that have been campaigning on these things for years. They should be proud of their efforts today, because finally we're seeing some movement in this space. I talked about the challenges we face in the rental market, and I think it's worth just going through those and putting some of the key stats on the public record again today. I'll start with the vacancy rate across the state. So in Adelaide City, the vacancy rate for property currently sits at 0.4%. It was 1.2% 5 years ago. In the Yorke Peninsula and the lower North SA, it's currently at 0.2%. It was 2% 5 years ago. We've seen significant rent increases in Adelaide, all dwellings, in the last 12 months. In fact, rent has gone up 7.2% across the board. Houses 6.7% and units 9.8%. But then we've got median rent in Adelaide sitting at $548 versus Melbourne at $553. Gone are the days when people can say Adelaide is a cheap place to live. We have 29% of people living in metropolitan Adelaide that are renters and 23.9% of people living in regional SA who are renters. These people deserve to have their rights protected by the law. They shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens. And sadly, that has been the case here in South Australia over many, many years. On the 14th of November, the National Shelter released the National Rental Affordability Index, and it showed that 5 years ago, rent in Greater Adelaide was considered acceptable at 20 to 25% of income, whereas now it is considered moderately unaffordable at 25 to 30% of income being spent on rent. Large parts of Greater Adelaide are now considered unaffordable, where people spend more than 30% of their income on rent. In November of this year, the Anti-Poverty Network released a report which details a snapshot of low-income renting, and it found that for people that are on Centrelink payments without any other form of income, 85% are experiencing rental stress and 54% are in the middle of a rental crisis. 70% of those people surveyed said that the cost of their rent meant they had to reduce spending on food. In June of this year, SACOS released their June quarter rental affordability report. Of the 33,000 renters in regional SA, 71% were in the bottom two income quintiles. The Anglicare rental affordability snapshot showed in South Australia there were no rentals affordable for a single person on JobSeeker, no rentals affordable for a single person on youth allowance. 1.7% of rentals affordable for a couple of job seeker with 2 children. 0.8% were affordable for a single person on a parenting payment with 1 or 2 children, and 0.8% were affordable for a single person on the aged pension. So, Mr Acting President, the facts speak for themselves, and it's pretty disappointing to hear the Liberal Party turn their noses up at these very sensible changes. It's very galling to see the One Nation Party attack the Greens for advocating for a fairer go for renters. It demonstrates really that the One Nation Party has no solutions at all other than fanning the flames of xenophobia when it comes to dealing with the cost of living crisis here in our state. They don't have any ideas other than to criticise others. I want to talk through some of the really positive elements of this bill. I also want to highlight one of the things that the Greens negotiated as part of our discussions with the government. We're really pleased that the government have agreed to put funding on the table for an advocacy service for renters. That's an independent tenants advocacy service that can stand up for renters' rights. We know, of course, that the SACAT receives approximately 1,500 residential tenancy-related matters per quarter. And an advocacy body such as the one that we have proposed and the government has supported exists in other jurisdictions such as Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania. The activities they undertake include informing and educating renters, supporting to resolve issues, providing help and assistance in writing letters or filling out forms, providing legal advice, support attending tribunal hearings, policy development work and systems advocacy, reform advocacy and training in tenancy law. These things will be really helpful for tenants in the middle of this rental crisis, and I know will be welcomed in particular by people that work in that sector. This bill has lots of really positive features. One of the elements in the bill that we welcome is the focus on or giving SACAT the power to consider whether or not a rent increase is disproportionate. And we in the Greens understand that disproportionate increases are those that are beyond CPI. And I think this change is a welcome one. It also will require the payment of rent to be reasonably convenient, and at least one means that's made available should be electronic for the tenant. And the government has also stamped out the use of third-party apps which apply often to tenants for a fee. And it's good that they've got rid of that practice. One of the elements that's had some focus in the media, and rightly so, is the changes that make it easier to rent with pets. The bill will limit the grounds in which a landlord can refuse to allow a tenant to keep a pet. Other jurisdictions have been well ahead of South Australia in allowing tenants to rent with pets. The ACT and Victoria have a presumption of renting with pets, which is considered the best practice model. In that case, it is the responsibility of the landlord, not the tenant, to apply to the tribunal to deny a request. This model is more in keeping with the Queensland model. That is where a landlord can knock back a request for a pet, but they have to have some clear grounds around that. And look, whilst we would have liked to have gone further, we recognise that this is going to be a really positive step for renters here in South Australia. We know that, according to the RSPCA, 1 in 5 animals surrendered is due to their owner being unable to find a rental property that allows them to have pets. And that's pretty cruel when you think about it, Mr Acting President, because a pet is actually a member of the family. And if you're moving house, you don't leave a member of your family behind. And yet that is actually what we're asking people to do in the middle of this rental crisis. Well, that changes with this law, and that's a really good thing. The bill also ensures that it's the responsibility of the landlord to manage the premises that have been contaminated by previous drug activity. It also reduces the right of entry to inspect a property to 4 times per year. Previously, it was every 4 weeks. It also deals with terminations and evictions. So it makes clear that a landlord can only terminate a fixed-term tenancy within 30 days' notice, whereas it was previously 28 days. That extra time is going to be so beneficial for people in the middle of this tight rental market. It's also going to see the removal of no-cause evictions from the Act, and that is instead ensuring that a landlord can only choose not to renew a lease if there are prescribed grounds the prescribed grounds have been met. This is a really, really important change, because one of the issues I think we face here in South Australia for renters is we have a really tight market, but at the same time, because the renter is living in fear of their lease not being renewed, they're not in a position to assert their rights under the Act. And I know myself, I rented when I was in my 20s and my early 30s. I had lots of issues in the rental market living in share housing, problems like broken air conditioning, broken toilets, issues with mould. It was very difficult to be able to assert my rights as a renter, because you knew heading into the Christmas period your lease is going to expire. You don't want to give yourself a bad reputation as a tenant and find that you're not able to then secure another place. That was 10 years ago. The market has changed dramatically since then. So this change is one that I think has been on the wish list for advocates in this space for many, many years. And finally, the Parliament can get that done. Another really important change relates to domestic abuse. And this bill establishes protections for people who need to terminate their agreement on the grounds of domestic abuse. They will no longer need to apply to SACAT. Instead, they can provide supporting evidence as prescribed in regulation. If a person is protected by an intervention order but not listed on a tenancy agreement, they will be able to apply to vary the agreement so that they can remain in their home without the perpetrator. The changes to the rules around damage caused to the property to protect people who have experienced domestic abuse are also happening. There's changes in the law relating to rooming houses and residential parks. There's also changes relating to solar systems, and tenants will be able to enter into agreements with landlords regarding the installation of solar energy for their homes. And also there's changes around the way that information is managed, and a landlord will not be able to charge a tenant a fee for giving personal information relating to them. But that's just a snapshot of some of the elements of this bill, Mr Acting President. There are many positive features that are worthy of support. And in concluding, I do just want to read out a few stories that have been shared with me. In the lead-up to this debate, I put out a call on my social media and said, look, does anyone have some stories they'd like me to read into Hansard? And we did get some constituent feedback, so I'll share those. The first of those, and I won't name the constituent, but I'll refer to that as story one. She wishes to share her daughter's experience as a tenant over the last decade. It's a long story, she writes. It comprised her health and is certainly keeping her in poverty. She is now homeless and has moved back in with myself, her mother and stepfather for the last 10 months. She cannot find affordable rent and is competing with hundreds of others in similar circumstances. 10 years ago, she moved from regional SA to Adelaide after ongoing harassment at her work and had depression as well as anxiety. She shared a house for the first 12 months with a former colleague. They went their separate ways and she found a National Rental Affordability Scheme house at Andrews Farm, which was modern and had the appliances working in good order. After 12 months, despite being an exemplary tenant, the rent increased to a level that was unaffordable for her on her New Start income. She was successful in getting a unit in Windsor Gardens, which had a Housing Improvement Act order over it. There was mould, bowed walls, salt damp, broken screens and many fixtures that simply did not work. It was during this time she developed an autoimmune disease which I believe was triggered by the mould and damp in this unit. Only one fan was working, screens were broken and only an antiquated air conditioner in the lounge was operational. She was there for nearly 8 years. The lounge ceiling collapsed, narrowly missing her despite bringing it to the attention of the agent many times that items were coming through from the roof. The owner shortly after this terminated the contract as she claimed she was selling the unit. Since then, my daughter has been unable to find accommodation in her price range and she's now on the disability pension. And that really underscores the point that I made earlier, Mr Acting President, about the benefit of axing no-cause evictions, because this would give a tenant in this situation the capacity to be able to better assert their rights. Story two. When we first moved into our rental in Blackwood, we had no access to electricity. The landlord had given SA Power Networks the wrong address to register the property. We did not have permissions necessary to register, as we did not hold the title to the property. We explained this to our real estate agent, and they insisted it was our responsibility. This went back and forth for 2 weeks. They then demanded that we pay rent without any power to the unit. Everything is electric: the stove, the water, and there's no gas. We did not. They then eventually had the property registered and told us this wasn't a good start for us, and that in the future we shouldn't make waves. We still had to pay rent for the first 2 weeks because we'd moved our stuff in, which was limited to a couch and a bed frame. We both had to stay with friends in this time. Shortly after, the backyard sewerage line developed a crack and began to leak raw sewage out of our backyard and into the walkway where other people walked. We were told it was not a priority to fix it, and this was only resolved as the strata got upset. We've also had an ongoing issue with mould in our ceilings. Well, this tenant, if this bill gets through, will be in a much better position to assert their rights. Story 3. We are paying $450 a week for an old housing trust house that is falling apart. We've had 8 maintenance reports in 3 months. We've had a power board that can't actually power the whole house properly. The backyard is completely overgrown. Can anyone seriously say, Mr Acting President, the current system is working? I mean, can the Liberal Party honestly say that the market is delivering what is needed to solve this crisis? It is clear that we need intervention, and whilst this bill does not go as far as the Greens would have liked, it is a significant step in the right direction, and it will have a tangible impact on this crisis, and I really do thank the government for their leadership and for stepping up to the mark on this important issue.